Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Daniel
with Kurt Bjorklund.
Daniel 9 starts with Daniel seeking God, verse 3, and then verse 4 says, I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commands. Now notice when he gets into confessing his sin, he begins by talking about the greatness of God. And this orients us into a place where we begin to say, God is the great one. And not just talking about our sin, but talking about God, both great in love and greatness just in general. And I want to just take a moment here to talk about the difference between what I'm going to say is spontaneous moments of confession and intentional, planned confession, especially when it comes to the character of God. There's a tendency, I think, for many people to be moved by God's greatness, moved to worship, moved to confession of his greatness from time to time as things happen in our lives and we are wowed by something God does. But there are times where planning it and reciting it and stating it helps us be reminded of the greatness of God. And without it, we will have a small view of God and a bigger view of ourselves and be kind of drawn into a space where instead of being carried along with a compelling vision of who God is, our vision of God will be smaller. And so by intentional, what I mean is that as we pray and seek God, as we see Daniel doing here, that we are reciting and considering who God is. Years ago, I wrote a book, a prayer book, and one of the things that as I studied prayer in the Bible and great prayers that people had prayed over time, that I saw was how I needed some help to be reminded to praise and confess God's greatness back to him. Because so often what I would do is I would pray what I'd call a grocery list prayer, which is simply, God, help me with this. God, help me with that. God, I need this. And what I needed help with, and this is where some structured prayers helped me, was saying, God, you are great. And as I began to see God's greatness, I began to see my neediness, and I began to confess again. And then we see here his confession. Verse 5, he says, we have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandment and rules. So now he moves into confession. And as he moves into confession, he prays both personally and corporately about this. Verse 8 says it again, to us, O Lord, belongs shame, to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. And then he says, but to you, O Lord, belong mercy and forgiveness. We have rebelled. Now notice the corporate language. He uses words like sinned, rebelled, not obeyed. In verse 5, he says, sinned, done wrong, acted wickedly. So his confession is comprehensive in the sense that he is talking about sinning, which without doing deep word studies, just generally means missing the mark. He's done wrong, which means we've chosen wrong. Acted wickedly mean we've done what is abhorrent. So if you just think about this, let's just think about using resources in our lives. If you believe that God has asked us to use our resources not just for ourselves, but to give to him. To sin means that sometimes we don't keep all of that. To choose wrong means that we realize that we're not, and we don't just kind of miss the mark on something, but we're intentional. To act wickedly would be to actively use our money against the purposes of God. And here he's saying, I've done this. And so his assessment of himself and his people is this broad assessment of saying, I have sinned, we have sinned, and here it is. And so my takeaway, in a sense, is how easy it is to have a non-comprehensive assessment of our sinfulness, to to simply lock into one thing and to not see even where we're corporately guilty. And sometimes our desire is right to say, I don't want to get into self-righteousness where I'm looking and confessing sin for other people, but to say, God, I'm part of a culture, even a Christian subculture at times, that acts wickedly in these ways, that is not doing right, and to come to God and understand that. But it takes an expanded, beautiful view of who God is for us to get there. So what would it look like for you today to be comprehensive in your confession of sin for yourself, your family, your business, your nation, your church? What would it look like for you to not leave parts of that unconfessed or unaddressed before God?
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.